Hello, friends. Robert Bevan here, author of the Caverns and Creatures series of comedy, fantasy novels, and short stories. And with me today is Sam West. We're going to be talking about the spell Ice Storm. Now, we just talked about Sleet Storm, and this is a similarly themed spell, but this one does some damage, and it's got other effects. And I don't know. I felt like it was kind of neat, but Sam is going to disagree with me. Take it away, Sam.
I I'm not a fan of spells that are worse versions of other spells combined into one. I think I often as a player am in a situation where I want the best thing that does the thing. So if I want to deal damage to something, I want the best thing that does the damage. If I want to affect the mobility of something, I want the best thing that affects the mobility of something. If I want to lock down a creature, I want the best thing that locks down the creature. Now, there's a caveat there. With D&D characters, you're often going to want things that fit to your theme and are the best of those things. So there's extra caveats. So this is obviously a lot better if you're an ice mage than it is otherwise, because it definitely sells the fantasy of, raining, hailing rocks from the sky and creating a big ice storm. Sure. What it doesn't do, though, is the best version or close to the best version of either of the two effects that it's giving you, which is damage and difficult terrain. That's what this spell does. It affects a relatively small area. It does pitiful damage for a 4th level spell, and it does difficult terrain for a single turn. Oy!
Yeah, see, I was looking at the description, and it looked like the area of effect looked like a reverse of Sleet Storm, with the Sleet Storm having the 40-foot radius and 20-foot high ceiling, and then this has 40-foot high ceiling and 20-foot radius, but that difference in radius is enormous.
It's gargantuan. It's less. It's what, a fourth the area, because it's 40 feet across as opposed to 80 feet across.
Yeah,
so
I'm not doing
the
math.
actual circumference is comparatively tiny.
Yeah,
like this hits functionally in most battle maps the same area Fireball hits, which means we immediately have to compare it to Fireball. And Fireball pantses this thing. Fireball makes this spell look like a joke. For a 4th level spell, so you're getting 96 damage, which is like 30-ish damage, and this is doing 23 damage on average for 46 plus 2d8. Like, this is an upper level spell hitting roughly the same area, doing less damage, which means you then have to say, okay,
4th level spell. It's hard to make my argument.
Then you have to ask yourself, how much do I value that area being difficult terrain for a turn? The answer most of the time is going to be I don't. I don't care about there being difficult terrain there for a turn. It helps that it's a 300-foot range, so you can slow things down by an extra turn sometimes. It's such a small radius, though, that if you're hitting things in the center of it, they'll get out the same turn, and then we'll have some room left over to finish a dash that's outside of difficult terrain. So you're not really mitigating that much distance. If you're putting it on the far side of it, then they at least are going to have to take the beginning of their next movement an extra 5 feet, so you're getting slightly more movement out of it. It's just the difficult terrain in only a 40-foot area will very rarely change the actions people need to use that significantly. And it hits, again, not that amazing of an area. Again, the range of 300 feet is nice, but not super relevant on most battle maps and most situations. I'm not seeing it.
If it knocked them prone like Sleet Storm, then I could make the argument that hit them with that, and somebody else can hit them with a fireball. You're doing some damage. You're knocking them on their asses, but no, just a little bit of difficult terrain. I guess it could work nice in a bottleneck situation, maybe.
Yeah. If you're in a bottleneck situation, you're missing out on most of the radius of it then. So you're like capping it at 4 creatures. If you're looking at like a 5-foot wide path, if you're looking at like a 10-foot wide path, you might get a couple
big
more creatures.
Bottleneck.
Sure. How many big bottlenecks are we regularly playing in D&D though, right? Like, the bottlenecks typically are your dungeon corridors. They might occasionally be a canyon, but not all that often, right?
I try to find the silver linings.
That's true. I don't want to say the spell is completely unusable. And I don't want to say the difficult terrain doesn't ever matter. There will be situations where you'll sometimes hit like 3 creatures on the far side of it, and eating an extra action from them is the difference between them getting to you around prior or not. That can be important. The fact that you can cast this like 2-3 times in a row means that you can continually drag out the distance if they only have the one way of getting to you. If they have to
But-
charge in a straight line over 120 feet towards you, you can make it so they take longer to get to you. Alternatively, you could just deal them more
Yeah.
damage and end the encounter faster.
Right. They'll never get to you.
Yeah, if they're dead, they don't get to you.
Yeah.
This, I also think I should state that, like, sometimes this is enough damage, and if this is ever enough damage, it's fireball with upside. So there's that. Like, if you're against a notable group of creatures, one of them is large and a lot of them are small, and the larger one's like 250 plus hit points, 7 extra damage isn't that relevant, and the difficult terrain on it is more relevant. And sometimes, again, the 46 or 48 plus 2d6 is enough to deal with a lot of the little things. Those are the situations where I think the spell is going to be a lot more useful and marginally more useful, but we're talking about very specific encounters, and we're talking, again, we need this to be very large distances for this to have practical effect. And this also has to be very large distances in straight lines, very open fieldy. The moment there's like buildings involved, the moment there's dynamic terrain that isn't just, I can run at them, there's ways around this to navigate through it that make it difficult to find use cases for. Those, I find most of the wide open environments that I play in are like big city street encounters. I like big city, like City of Brass in the Plane of Fire, to me, is where I expect high level encounters to kind of go. Even if you're in like some gigantic dungeon pit, devil demon castle or something, there's going to be molten rock and lava, big things jutting out around the place. If you're going into fight an ancient green dragon in an underground swamp, you're going to be dealing with large trees and other big hazardous terrain people can hide and navigate around. It's going to make it so that you don't there's going to be more than one clear path to you at any given time in the bigger battle maps, which make the difficult terrain area a lot worse because creatures are just going to split and separate and not be in fireball formation, right? That makes the spell's functionality substantially worse.
Well, if your goal was to firewall them, yes, but if you had something else in mind, then getting them to scatter in different directions could be to your advantage.
Yeah, if they're going to scatter in different directions anyway because fireball exists, this is worse because a better spell exists, and that's kind of sucky.
Yeah.
So you still know when you use this in either situation. I guess if you only have this and you're like, I want to play a game without fireball because fireball's boring and I think it's been overused or whatever, and that's a fair reason to not want to use fireballs. You've seen it 1,000 times. This can be like the big bad now knows that I have this, so they're going to have their minions split up. Sure. That's not a great reason to use it this way. I think that you could conceivably, like, there can be, if you're in really high level gameplay where the DM has battle maps with lots of different odds and ends, summoning portals, things coming in from different sides, managing different areas. This spell isn't as good as something like Sleet Storm. This spell isn't as good as something that controls an area for a duration. The fact that it only lasts a single round means you're not locking any area down for any meaningful amount of time. You're just spending a board level spell slot to get a round of it. So in those big dynamic environments where you would expect something like creating difficult terrain to be important, it doesn't do it very well. Entanglement does it better, right? Like, there are better spells at lower levels for controlling area than this. And the damage it's giving you is, I don't know. I don't see it.
Yeah, you've won me over once again, Sam.
If you want to do damage, deal damage. If you want to control an area. Don't do both works.
See, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think, hybrid use spells have their place. This just doesn't seem like a great example of one.
Yeah, it does both of them. At least it does the secondary effect so poorly it's hard to justify.
Yeah,
is where this really settles.
What about well, I mean, I guess it's not amazing, but it does deal 2 different damage types. If
yep.
How often does that matter?
It doesn't. It is, honestly, it annoys me slightly just because I have to fish out different kinds of dice and I have to remember which is which, and there'll be that slight hiccup where you'll be like, oh, I did 2d8 cold damage and 46 bludgeoning damage, and then you'll be like, great, and then you'll be like, oh wait, I read that wrong, it's 2d8 bludgeoning damage and 46 cold damage, and the DM will be like, what's the total again? And that's all that the difference in types typically matters. It also just means, like, if something's resistant or immune to either of these damage types, you still don't want to cast it against them, right? Like, it doesn't change the outcome. Be like, oh, well, this is marginally better against things that are resistant to cold damage because it also does bludgeoning damage. No, you're not going to cast that against something that is resistant to cold damage because enough of it's mitigated that you just rather use something else, right?
Yeah.
The split damage types don't really make the spell so much better against things that are good against one of the 2 damage types to make it worthwhile. And there just aren't enough things that have vulnerability to these kinds of things that you can pull it out flexibly to be like, this is slightly better against the thing that's vulnerable to it. Yeah, it's meaningless. It's a moot point that slightly annoys me. But that's personal preference. I know some people love rolling different dice and stuff.
Yeah, rolling different dice is fun, but yeah, to zero effect, less fun.
Yeah.
What about you've got in your notes here as a DM tool? What did you have in mind there?
This is because it is lower damage than something like Fireball, this can be a interesting thing to give to enemies if your party is lower on HP and you're higher in the CRs, because it doesn't feel like you're pulling punches when you actually are, which is a neat little caveat that bad spells kind of give you. Is you can say, I'm casting high level spells against you, look how scary this is, and then the players go, oh my god, that's a 4th level spell. And then you look at the damage and you're like, well, you could have looked past Fireball at us. And then he didn't, because, you know, he was trying to be generous and reduce the challenge without making it look like that. But it also, like, beyond just that, I think that the difficult terrain for a single round at the entrance of an encounter, against the party specifically who normally is approaching the problem, not defending the problem, is going to be a little bit more useful. Like if your big bad is setting up their big set piece encounter and they start with an ice storm on the party to slow them down for a single round, that's going to give the party a much more complex environment to navigate and have to figure out, well, now it's more meaningful to cast prep spells. I have slightly more interesting decisions because I don't want to necessarily have to dash out of this. Paladins and stuff are going to consider slightly different options. It will open up a little bit of different decision making because you know the difficult terrain is only going to last a round, which I think makes it slightly more interesting to use. I think it's a little bit more interesting to be on the receiving end sometimes than it is to be on the offense using it, because you have, like, often prep spells feel bad to use in combat, and this gives you a reason to say, well, I'm not going to be using any of my action for anything else anyway, might as well prep spells. There are some of those niche little cases that make it an interesting option for DMs more so than players, I think. But even then, like, it's kind of moot. You can do this is mainly a damage spell that isn't as good damage as the damage spells of the relevant levels.
Yeah. All right. Well, Sam, score?
I think this is a 2 out of 5. I think this is a spell that it's not so horrendous you'll never find uses for it. There will be the occasional time it'll eat an extra action and deal enough damage you'll be happy that you prepped it. That's not going to be most of the time, though.
Yeah, I have to agree with you after this conversation. I like the idea of the hybrid spell with multiple effects, but I don't think this one pulled it off.
I don't think so either.
All right. Well, thank you, Sam, for your thoughts, and thank you, watchers and listeners, for watching and listening. That was that was Ice Storm, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you found this helpful, informative, or entertaining, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button below. You needn't smash it. A gentle tap will suffice. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel. And make sure you check out the links in the description where you'll find my Caverns and Creatures series of comedy fantasy novels, our full review of the spell, and other fun things.